Welcome back to the EFI Hardware podcast, making EFI, well, easy. I'm your host, and with me again is our EFI expert.
Back again. And before you ask, yep, we're AI.
But the content, human approved all the way. Today, we're diving into fuel injector spray patterns.
The unsung hero of a good running engine, you could say.
Absolutely, that fine mist of fuel is what makes your engine happy, or makes it sputter if things aren't dialed in.
Right, and we're not going to treat you like beginners here. We know our listeners are already pretty familiar with EFI systems, but spray patterns, they can be a bit of a mystery even for experienced tuners.
Totally. They're essential for that perfect air-fuel mix. Okay, so let's start with the basics just to make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is an EFI injector?
Well, at its heart, it's basically a solenoid, electronically controlled. This little valve regulates the flow of fuel through a tiny opening, an orifice.
Okay, and these injectors, they're pulsing on and off constantly, right? Super fast.
Crazy fast, yeah. We're talking milliseconds here. That pulsing controls how much fuel is actually delivered, and that percentage of time they're open, that's what we call the duty cycle.
Makes sense. Now, something I've always wondered about is injector sizing. What are some of the common mistakes people make when choosing injectors? And what kind of impact does that have on engine performance in the real world?
You hit a crucial point there. If you go too big with your injectors, you end up sacrificing accuracy at low fuel flow. You'll have rough idle, the engine might stumble, even misfire. But go too small. You'll run lean when you're at high RPMs or when you're really pushing the engine. Not good. That can cause overheating and damage.
Definitely something to avoid. So let's talk about the different types of injectors: pintle, disc, and ball. The pintle type seems to be the workhorse, the most common one we see out there.
Yeah, for sure. In a pintle injector, you've got this needle-like part, the pintle, that moves in and out of the orifice. This controls both the fuel flow and how well the fuel atomizes, how finely it's broken up.
Got it. Better atomization equals better combustion. Like the fuel mixes with the air more efficiently.
Exactly. And pintle injectors, they're generally known for that good atomization, creating a cone-shaped spray pattern. The angle of that cone usually falls somewhere between 15 and 30 degrees.
All right, so onto disc-type injectors. What's the mechanism there?
Instead of a single pintle, you have a disc. And this disc has multiple tiny holes around it. When you energize the injector, that disc lifts from its seat, and fuel flows through those holes, exiting the orifice.
So instead of one stream of fuel, you've got multiple smaller jets.
Exactly, and that creates a narrower spray pattern, typically between 10 and 20 degrees. This can be super useful when you want to target fuel to specific areas in the intake manifold, like directly at the intake valve.
Makes sense. But wouldn't a narrower spray also increase the chances of fuel puddling on the back of the valve?
That's a great question. While there's a theoretical risk, it's often mitigated by the intake manifold design and the airflow. Plus, there's a trade-off. Disc injectors are less prone to clogging.
Interesting. Okay, another thing about these disc injectors, you mentioned that the disc can rotate while it's operating. What's the purpose of that?
Honestly, it's not completely understood. Some say it might distribute the fuel more evenly. Others think it might reduce wear on the injector by constantly changing the contact points.
Okay, so pintle and disc, check. What about bowl-type injectors? Are they kind of similar to the disc type?
They share some similarities. Like the disc type, they also have a ball that lifts to let fuel flow. But instead of holes in a disc, the fuel's directed by a plate, a fixed plate with several holes, like a fixed shower head almost.
So the ball acts as the valve, and that plate shapes the spray. Got it.
Exactly. Ball-type injectors also create a pretty narrow spray, usually 10 to 15 degrees. And in terms of atomization, they're often compared to the disc type.
Good fuel filtration is still super important regardless of the injector type you have.
Absolutely. And just a quick shout out, EFI Hardware offers a great range of high-quality fuel filters. You can find them on our website, of course.
Okay, back to spray patterns themselves. One they talk about is the early tapered pintle design. Pretty common. That mushroom-shaped tip creates a diverging spray pattern. What's the logic behind that design?
Think of it like a water fountain. Fuel flows around that mushroom shape, gets pushed outward, creates a wider cone. Pretty standard back in the early days of fuel injection.
Got it. Then they've got this single-hole plate design. That one's all about precision, right? Super narrow sprays.
Yep. Often used when you need precise fuel targeting. Some high-performance applications use that.
Okay, let's talk about two-hole patterns. Those are pretty popular, especially for engines with 2 intake valves per cylinder.
Exactly. The idea is to hit both of those intake valves, ensure good fuel distribution, and maximize the air-fuel mix.
They talk about narrow versus wide V angles. And then there's this whole thing about clocking. Can you break that down for us?
Well, think of the V angle as how spread out those two jets of fuel are.
So the V angle is about directing that fuel precisely. What about clocking then?
Clocking is about the orientation of that V. Think of the injector like a clock face. You can rotate the V to point the spray in the right direction, like adjusting the hands on a clock.
I like that analogy. So many variations. And some spray patterns aren't even straight down. Some have bent off axis. What's that all about?
Ah, those bent patterns. They're designed to angle the spray, usually toward the intake valves. It's like a curved straw for your fuel, commonly seen in engines with more intricate intake manifolds.
So lots of variations out there. And it sounds like we're just scratching the surface when it comes to multi-hole designs.
Definitely. As emission standards have gotten tougher, you see more and smaller holes, all about improving atomization, especially during cold starts. Smaller droplets, better mixing.
So more holes equals better atomization equals a cleaner burn. Makes sense. And I've even heard of newer designs with extended tips, creating a V pattern that's bent off axis. What's the advantage of that?
All about efficiency and precision. Those extended tip designs allow you to really target the spray, especially in engines with those complex manifolds we were talking about.
Okay, starting to see how all these designs work together. We've got one more pattern to cover. The TBI, or throttle body injector, pattern. How's that one different?
Ah, the TBI. A little different. Since these injectors sit in the throttle body, they need to spray a much wider pattern.
Why is that? They still have to get fuel to the cylinders, right?
Of course, but the fuel isn't directly hitting those hot intake valves, which normally helps with atomization. The TBI injector has to compensate with a wider spray to get good mixing with the air.
So instead of precisely watering each plant, it's more like using a sprinkler for your lawn. Makes sense. So with all these different spray patterns, how do you know which one's right for your engine?
The main thing is, each pattern, it's designed for a specific purpose, for a specific type of engine.
So you're saying there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Just swapping to a different pattern because you think it's better won't magically boost performance.
Nope, not at all. In fact, you could make things worse.
Okay, how so? How could a different spray pattern hurt performance?
Let's say you choose an injector with a really wide V-shaped pattern. But if that spray completely misses your intake valves, you're not getting fuel where it needs to be. Poor combustion, wasted fuel, performance takes a hit.
Ah, makes sense. So matching the spray pattern to the shape of your intake manifold, the position of those valves, that's crucial.
Exactly. And as a general rule, if your engine's running well, stick with the same injector type that the manufacturer used. Those engineers, they got a lot of thought into it.
But what about people building custom engines or modifying existing ones? How do they go about choosing the right setup?
That gets a bit trickier. You might need to consult with a specialist. Of course, here at EFI Hardware, we're always happy to help. We can help figure out the right injector size and spray pattern based on your engine specs and your goals.
That's great to know. So for our listeners out there who are building custom setups, what are some key things they should consider when choosing injectors and spray patterns?
First off, how big's your engine? How much power are you aiming for? That determines how much fuel you need to flow, which will point you toward a specific range of injector sizes.
So engine size and horsepower, that's the starting point. What else?
The intake manifold, that's huge. As we've been discussing, the shape of that manifold and where those valves are, that's going to determine which spray patterns will work best.
Right. And how you plan to use the engine also plays a role, right? A track car versus a daily driver, for example.
Absolutely. A high-revving race engine has different needs compared to a truck engine built for hauling. Consider the engine's operating range, what you'll be demanding from it, your overall goals.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot. Fuel flow, atomization, the spray pattern itself. Make sure everything's working together in harmony.
They'll build it like putting together a puzzle. All the pieces have to fit, and when you get it right, the results are fantastic.
Definitely sounds like a lot to think about to get the most out of your EFI system. But hey, that's what we're here for, right? Speaking of which, before we move on, I wanted to remind everyone about the resources on the EFI Hardware website.
Oh yeah, we've got a ton of information on injectors, spray patterns, all things EFI. You can see our selection of injectors, read all the details, and even check out those spray pattern visuals we keep mentioning.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link to all of that in the show notes. So we've talked about matching the right injector to the engine. What about the fuel itself? Does the type of fuel have any impact on spray patterns?
Another good question, and the answer is yes. Different fuels, they have different densities, different viscosities, affects how they flow, how they atomize.
So an injector that works perfectly with gasoline might not be the best choice for, say, E85 or methanol.
Precisely. You might need to adjust your sizing or even use injectors designed for those alternative fuels. And tuning, of course, is essential whenever you're switching fuel types.
Makes sense. We've covered a lot today. We've dug into how injectors actually work, explored the different types and their spray patterns, and talked about matching them to your engine.
Yeah, a lot of ground covered. Hopefully we've cleared up some of the mystery surrounding spray patterns.
I think so. What about you? What's the one takeaway you want listeners to remember about spray patterns?
For me, it's this. Not all spray patterns are created equal. What works great in one engine might be a disaster in another. It's all about understanding those nuances and matching them to your application.
Well said. And if there's any doubt, remember the experts at EFI Hardware are always here to help navigate the world of fuel injection.
Exactly. We love EFI, and we love helping our customers get the best performance out of their builds. And hey, if you want to learn more, check out the EFI Hardware website. We've got a ton of resources, in-depth articles, helpful videos, those awesome spray pattern visuals.
And of course, if you have questions, need help choosing the right injectors, or any EFI components for that matter, don't hesitate to reach out to us at EFI Hardware.
We live and breathe EFI here, and we love helping our customers reach their performance goals.
That's all the time we have for today.
Yeah, but keep those engines running strong, and remember, it all starts with that perfect spray of fuel.
Thanks for tuning into the EFI Hardware podcast.